Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
As a 19-year-old college student, I was flying halfway across the world for a study abroad program. 16 hours straight on a plane is nobody's idea of fun, but I knew how to make it work for me. I always pay a little extra for the aisle seat for several reasons. First, I'm barely 5 feet tall, which means I can't reach the overhead compartments, so I have to store my backpack under the seat in front of me. The aisle seat gives me more leg room to do this without disturbing the passenger in front of me. Second, middle seats give me terrible motion sickness, something I discovered during a miserable family vacation when I was 12. And third, I really don't like being sandwiched between strangers for hours on end. So there I was, settled into my carefully selected aisle seat. I had boarded early as usual with my ticket neatly tucked into my passport holder. I was organizing my things, putting my book, snacks, and headphones within easy reach when I noticed this woman with 2 kids boarding the plane. It struck me as odd because airlines usually board families with small children first, but maybe they were late or something. I didn't think much of it until she stopped right next to my row and stared at me. The woman bluntly told me I needed to move from my seat. When I asked her to clarify what she meant, she explained that she needed the aisle seat because she had 2 kids with her. I was taken aback by her directness but tried to remain polite. I explained to her that this was my assigned seat and that I had specifically paid extra for it. The woman insisted that she deserved the aisle seat more than I did because she had 2 children. She even went as far as to call me just a kid myself. I tried to be understanding and told her that while I sympathized with how difficult traveling with children might be, the airline had pre-assigned seats and this one was mine. Her face grew red as she raised her voice. She started lecturing me about how young people today have no manners and don't know how to respect mothers. She went on about how she and her children had been through a lot, and the least I could do was give up my seat. Without waiting for me to respond, she instructed her kids to sit in the seats next to me, the middle and window seat in my row. The children, who looked about 7 and 9, seemed uncomfortable but followed their mother's instructions while she remained standing in the aisle, blocking other passengers. I was getting nervous with all the attention, but I stood my ground. This wasn't about me being difficult. I had legitimate reasons for needing this specific seat, and I had paid for it. After a while, more passengers boarded, and a man approached our row looking confused. He asked me if the children sitting next to me were mine. I told him they weren't, and pointed to the woman who was still standing in the aisle, now arguing with a flight attendant about overhead bin space. The man frowned and checked his boarding pass again. He told us that these seats actually belonged to him and his colleagues, as they were traveling together. The woman immediately rushed back over. She started telling us that she was traveling alone with her 2 kids and claimed she was pregnant. She accused us all of being very disrespectful. She didn't look pregnant at all, but I wasn't about to comment on that. The man sighed deeply and told her that having kids was her choice and she shouldn't blame us for following the seating arrangements the airline assigned. The woman became more agitated and asked if we were harassing her. She accused us of ganging up on a single mother. She started raising her voice even more, drawing stares from other passengers. Then, to my horror, she reached down and yanked my backpack from under the seat. She declared that if I wouldn't move, then my things would. I protested and told her to stop touching my belongings. A flight attendant quickly approached our row, looking concerned. She asked what the problem was. The man explained the situation while I tried to retrieve my backpack. The woman was clutching it to her chest now, as if it belonged to her. The flight attendant requested to see everyone's boarding passes. The man and I promptly handed ours over. The woman fumbled through her purse, muttering about harassment and disrespect. After checking the passes, the flight attendant told the woman that her actual seats were in row 47 at the back of the plane. She explained that we were all in our correct assigned seats. The woman insisted that was impossible because she had specifically requested seats at the front. The flight attendant apologized but stated that her boarding passes clearly indicated row 47, seats D, E, and F. She instructed the woman and her children to move to their assigned seats so that boarding could be completed. The woman's face turned red. She loudly complained that the situation was outrageous, emphasizing again that she was a mother with 2 kids and pregnant. The flight attendant asked her to lower her voice and repeated that her assigned seats were in row 47. She suggested that if the woman had an issue with her seat assignment, she would need to discuss it with customer service after the flight. Reluctantly, the woman gathered her children and headed toward the back of the plane, shooting me a death glare as she went. Throughout the flight, her kids kept coming up to our row, pushing our food trays when meals were served, trying to pull my backpack again, and even crying and punching the back of our seats. It was clear their mother was sending them to harass us. I tried to ignore it at first, but after the third visit from her children, I pressed the call button for the flight attendant. When the flight attendant arrived, she asked if everything was all right. I explained that the woman from earlier kept sending her kids up to bother us. As if on cue, one of the kids appeared again and tried to grab the man's tablet. The flight attendant told the child he needed to return to his seat immediately. The flight attendant escorted the child back and had a stern conversation with the mother. I couldn't hear what was said, but the woman looked furious. The flight attendant returned to tell us she had given the mother a formal warning and that any further disruptions would result in consequences upon landing. For the next hour or so, things were quiet. I managed to watch a movie and even doze off for a bit. But about halfway through the flight, I woke up to a commotion a few rows behind us. The woman was arguing loudly with another passenger about switching seats. The flight attendants were trying to calm her down, but she was becoming more and more belligerent. Eventually, one of the senior flight attendants approached her with what looked like a written warning. The woman snatched it, tore it up, and threw the pieces on the floor. That's when the captain made an announcement that there was a disruptive passenger on board and that security would be meeting the plane upon landing. For the rest of the flight, a flight attendant was stationed near the woman's row. Her kids were still acting up, but at least they weren't coming to bother us anymore. When we finally landed after 16 long hours, we were asked to remain seated while security boarded the plane. 2 officers came on board and went straight to the woman's row. She started yelling about discrimination and harassment, but they escorted her and her children off the plane. As the rest of us were deplaning, the flight attendant who had helped us earlier pulled me and the man aside. She apologized for the trouble we had experienced and explained that the airline would like to offer us both a discount code for our next flight as a gesture of goodwill. She handed us each a card with a substantial discount code. It was a nice gesture, but honestly, I was just relieved the ordeal was over. As we walked through the terminal, the man and I briefly chatted about what had happened. He asked if I could believe that the woman had tried to claim my seat like that. I agreed and commented that her sense of entitlement was unreal. He then shared that he had overheard something interesting. According to what the security officers had said, they had found some suspicious items in the woman's luggage during the routine scan. She was going to be detained for questioning. I hadn't heard that part, but it didn't surprise me. Someone with such blatant disregard for rules and boundaries probably didn't think airline security protocols applied to her either. I've taken many flights since then, always in an aisle seat, and thankfully have never encountered anyone quite like that woman again. So my sister and I were talking about childhood memories last night over FaceTime when my mom, who was cleaning nearby, yelled over at us asking if we remembered what happened to the principal. Oh, I remember exactly what happened to the principal. Let me take you back to when I was about 10 years old. Over 15 years ago now, I was what you'd call a unique kid who frequently found myself in trouble. I'm actually autistic, but I wasn't diagnosed until I was nearly 14. Back then, my behaviors were usually labeled as me being difficult rather than recognized as normal for an autistic child. For example, I didn't do my homework for 3 entire years. Somehow no one noticed because it took time away from my obsession with nature documentaries. I'm glad I didn't get diagnosed earlier because I did really well in school and having a support teacher might have held me back. My elementary school had a special unit for kids with special needs, mostly for children with more severe autism than mine. The issue is that when you put autistic kids with different needs and social tolerances together, things can spiral out of control quickly. There was this one boy in my class who was a complete terror. He would hit, bite, and chase other children. His favorite trick was chasing us with his water bottle and soaking us, which was bad since our school uniform included white shirts. I hit puberty earlier than the other girls in my class, so I already had a small but noticeable figure. This boy thought it was hilarious to target me specifically. He would often ambush me as I was leaving school to walk home. I lived right next to the school, so I was allowed to walk home alone from age 7 because my mom could see me from our window. She would frequently get into shouting matches with his mom, the entitled mom of this story, whenever her son did this to me. His mom believed that because he had Asperger's, he could do whatever he wanted without consequences. She thought he wasn't doing anything wrong. that he was just being a boy, and that I should be ashamed for getting upset. I was 10 years old. I vividly remember her screaming in my face one day, accusing me of bullying a disabled boy and insisting that it was only water. But what stuck with me wasn't her words, which were her usual nonsense, but her breath, which was absolutely foul. Eventually, I reached my breaking point. I was walking home one day drinking one of those small cartons of chocolate milk from lunch. The boy ran up to us, delighted, and started soaking my friend first, who angrily told him to get lost and called him a freak. Obviously, that didn't work. As he turned to target me next, I struck first, not with my fists, but with my chocolate milk. I squeezed that carton with all my might, spraying him in the face, hair, and all over his bright blue coat. He started screaming and flapping his arms in panic. His mom came stomping over, while my mom was shouting from our window. My friend and I took off running. I ran inside my house as fast as I could, but it wasn't long before his mom appeared at our door, shrieking at my mom. I mostly hid during this confrontation, but I could hear the back and forth. The entitled mom called me a devil child, while my mom fired back that they'd been told before not to let him splash little girls like that or he'd turn into a pervert. The entitled mom responded by asking how my mom could have no compassion for a disabled little boy. Eventually, she left, loudly announcing she was going to the school right away to speak to the principal and get me expelled. Our principal was a young, nice lady who I'd always thought was stern but fair. This terrified me. What if I got expelled from elementary school? What if I never learned my multiplication tables? We got a call later that night from the principal asking if my mom could come in tomorrow afternoon to discuss what happened and saying I didn't need to come to school until after they had spoken. I felt awful. My mom had to miss half a day of work. My dad was furious, and I was mortified, certain I was in massive trouble. To my surprise, I wasn't in trouble at all. My meeting with the principal lasted less than 5 minutes. She just told me not to do it again, and to go to what remained of my classes for the day. However, I noticed the principal had a very swollen black eye. My mother learned the rest of the story after I left. Apparently, the principal thought what I'd done was hilarious and started laughing when she heard about it. After the mom stormed away from our door, she had barged into the school and into the principal's office during a staff meeting. She started screaming while dragging her milk-covered son behind her, leaving a trail of chocolate milk everywhere. I never got the exact details, but the gist was that after the principal refused to expel me, feeling it would be unfair to punish a child who had been routinely harassed, the mom punched her in the face right there in her office in front of the entire staff. The janitor, a large man, had to escort her out, and she was permanently banned from school grounds. The principal told my mom that in a normal situation, she would have had to discipline both children as neither behavior was acceptable. But in light of what happened yesterday, she was more inclined to find what I did rather amusing. My mom apologized about the principal's eye and asked if she was going to press charges. The principal assured her that she absolutely would, and that the police had already been contacted. She mentioned that this wasn't the entitled mom's first incident, but it would definitely be her last one at their school. The following week, we learned that the entitled mom had been arrested for assault. The principal had pressed charges, and with multiple witnesses, it was an open and shut case. The mom ended up with community service, mandatory anger management classes, and a restraining order preventing her from coming anywhere near the school. The boy was transferred to a specialized school that could better address his needs with proper boundaries and support. I heard years later that without his mother's enabling behavior, he actually thrived in the structured environment and eventually learned appropriate social skills. The principal became something of a legend among the students. Her black eye healed, but her reputation as the teacher who stood up to the crazy milk mom, as we called her, remained throughout my time there. She even instituted a school-wide anti-bullying program that specifically addressed how to handle situations like mine, though squirting milk at your tormentors was explicitly listed as not recommended. I started getting the support I needed, even without a formal diagnosis yet. Teachers began to understand that my behaviors weren't just me being difficult, and I was given more latitude to pursue my interests while still completing my schoolwork. Sometimes I wonder what happened if I hadn't fought back that day. I don't regret standing up for myself, though I probably could have chosen a less messy method. Still, watching a bully get covered in chocolate milk remains one of the most satisfying memories of my childhood. This happened exactly 5 years ago when I was still in high school. My life was pretty ordinary, studying for exams, hanging out with friends, and spending time with my family. We're a close-knit Croatian family, not overly wealthy, but comfortable and happy. We value our traditions and family gatherings, which is why when my first cousin had his first child, a baby boy named Lucian, we were all excited to attend the baptism. My cousin, who I've always looked up to, married an Italian woman a few years back. They make a lovely couple, and I was genuinely happy for them. The baptism ceremony was beautiful, taking place in a small church near the coast. After the ceremony, we were all invited to a nearby restaurant built on a cliff overlooking the sea, a stunning location with breathtaking views. There were about 100 people at the celebration. Our family, my father, mother, brother, grandfather, and me took our seats at one of the main tables, close to where my cousin and his wife were sitting with their new baby. I was scrolling through my phone, enjoying the moment, when I noticed a family entering the restaurant. They were all dressed in expensive clothes and had this air about them like they owned the place. I later found out they were relatives from my cousin's wife's side visiting from Italy. The father approached our table with a seemingly polite smile. The entitled father politely asked if we could trade places with them because his child was afraid of heights. My father, always reasonable, agreed and said he would just inform my cousin about the switch. The entitled father thanked him with false politeness. While my father went to find my cousin, the entitled mother approached our table and impatiently asked why we hadn't moved yet, stating that her son wanted to sit there. My mother explained that my father had gone to tell my cousin about the switch. The entitled mother responded with irritation, telling us to hurry up. I decided to stretch my legs and walk around a bit, still looking at my phone. That's when I encountered their son, who was about 13. He looked at me with a smug expression and condescendingly remarked that it was good to see I had started moving, suggesting it was about time. When I asked him what he meant, he continued with his smug attitude, saying it was nice that we were giving them suitable accommodation and suggesting I would like sitting at a table far away from the main area. When I questioned what he meant by that, he dismissed it as nothing. I was confused but decided not to make a scene. We eventually switched places with them. When dinner was served, I noticed the entitled family looking at our food with disgust. My brother and father got up to talk to some relatives, and that's when the entitled father and his son approached our table again. The entitled father asked if they could have part of our food portion, pointing at our large, shared platter. My mother was confused by this request. The entitled kid then made a rude comment suggesting that we didn't need more food, implying we were overweight. When I asked him to clarify what he had just said, the entitled father explained that his son was suggesting we should go on a diet. I was absolutely stunned. My mother looked like she was about to cry. Before I could respond, they just took our platter and walked back to their table. When my father returned and found out what happened, he was furious and ready to confront them. Thankfully, my grandfather, who had overheard the conversation, decided to take matters into his own hands. My grandfather, despite not speaking English, approached their table with me in tow to translate. He instructed me to tell the jerk to apologize. The entitled father just smiled while the entitled mother stood up and insulted us further, saying we should consider their comments helpful, and that if we ate any more, we would start resembling pigs. We were beyond angry at this point. My cousin's brother, a retired military colonel who now works as a stonemason, heard the commotion and joined us at their table. He angrily demanded to know what they had said to his family. The entitled father responded with more insults, saying he didn't understand what my cousin's wife saw in him and calling us all hillbillies. My cousin's brother was visibly struggling to maintain his composure. Then the entitled kid made it worse by saying that even calling us hillbillies was an insult to actual hillbillies, suggesting we were even lower than that. Something in me snapped. I lunged forward and punched the kid right in his smug face. His lip immediately started bleeding. The entitled mother jumped up and began screaming, calling me an animal for hitting her baby boy and threatening to have us all arrested. The entitled father slapped me across the face and started yelling in Italian. The entire restaurant fell silent as my cousin and his wife rushed over. The entitled mother continued her hysterical demands for my arrest, calling me a jerk for striking her son. My brother, hearing what had happened, stormed over and threatened the entitled mother, demanding she apologize for what she said to our mother and warning that there would be 2 ambulances coming if she didn't. The situation quickly devolved into a shouting match between our families. Just when it seemed like things couldn't get worse, my cousin's wife stepped forward and, to everyone's surprise, slapped the entitled mother hard across the face. My cousin's wife furiously berated the entitled mother, accusing her of coming to her son's baptism and insulting her family. She claimed the only reason the entitled mother had anything in life was because she had flirted her way into her position. She continued berating them in rapid Italian that I couldn't understand, but from the looks on everyone's faces, it was scathing. The entitled family, thoroughly humiliated, gathered their belongings and left the restaurant, still hurling insults as they went. Thankfully, they never pressed charges about the punch, probably because they would have had to explain their behavior too. After they left, the celebration slowly got back on track. My cousin's wife apologized to us for her relative's behavior, explaining that they had always been problematic and entitled. My mother eventually stopped crying and my father calmed down. The rest of the evening was actually quite pleasant. We moved back to our original table, which had a much better view, and enjoyed the delicious food that was brought out to replace what they had taken. My grandfather even made a touching toast to baby Lucien, wishing him a life free of entitled jerks like those we had just encountered. In the years since, that baptism has become a legendary story in our family. The day we stood up to entitled bullies, and my cousin's wife proved she was truly one of us. Whenever we gather for family events, someone inevitably brings it up and we all laugh about it now. As for the entitled family, we heard that they weren't invited to any more family functions after that. My cousin's wife made sure of that. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.